everyone, and welcome back to another composition walkthrough. Today we're going to be doing part 2 of our Skyrim theme. A couple weeks ago we did the release for part 1, which was looking at the song's progression, looking at the orchestration of it, how you can do something similar using similar orchestration or using similar instruments, as well as just the overall speed of how that song progressed and what they used to progress it. Today we're going to be taking a look at the piece and dissecting its main theme, as well as looking at its chord progressions, figuring out how they wrote out this main theme, and dissecting it so that possibly you can use this information to write something similar or different in the future using this knowledge. Now, before we get going in on this, I highly recommend watching part 1 of the walkthrough we did a couple weeks ago. Link in the description for that. I also have the MIDI available for your own study. You can download that below as well. And without further ado, let's get right into this. So let's listen to the first iteration of the main theme in this song first. So you hear this pretty much right at the beginning of the track, not even 30 seconds in, really. And it sets the stage for the rest of the track by presenting you with a very strong theme that outlines the mood of the track, what it's trying to represent, and helps push forward the character and the emotion of what it's being used with, such as the game Skyrim, the main character, the Dragonborn hero. But how do you get something like this from scratch? How can you write something out that sounds just as complicated, just as intricate, and yet meshes it all together so well? Well, there are several ways to start writing out a theme, which we've discussed in some of our previous walkthrough videos of other tracks. The first way you can go about and start writing any sort of track is by looking at your chords. What sort of chordal progression do you want? What sort of harmonic progression do you want? Do you want it to be dark? Do you want it to be happy? Do you want it to be heroic? Traits such as these help discern which chords you are going to use in your track, because your chords, more often than not, in your overall harmony will help dictate the emotion as you're moving forward. Now, a lot of starting out composers will make a very big mistake in writing out their chords. They listen to these big fancy tracks by huge composers with massive titles under their belt, such as Hans Zimmer, Junkie XL, John Williams, etc., all the big movie ones. Or they'll look at the super complex compositions of more classical composers such as Bach, Rachmaninoff, and Beethoven, and they'll study these orchestrations and they'll get it into their head that what they're writing is not complex enough to sound good. Now, this isn't true at all. In fact, more often than not, simplistic is the way to go. All these big time composers who write for these big movies nowadays, you study their orchestrations and they can actually be broken down into very simple chord progressions or very simple harmonic progressions. Of course, there's always something to say about modal borrowing, where they borrow chords or notes from a different scale that's near the original scale that we're working with. Stuff like that is more creative than not, and putting a little bit of modal change into your track can help push the emotion forward if it's the emotion that you're looking for. It isn't required to make a great track. Bringing it back to our focus here with this Skyrim theme, if you study it closely and you look at the chordal progression of it, they're still just using modified block chords. After the main theme even, and in sections such as the middle section over here after the sopranos, they have very distinguished blocked chords blocked out here, as well as further down over here where they use these massive long blocked out chords. So using big complex chords such as jazz chords, add 9, add 11, add 17, whatever, they aren't necessary to make a very interesting and beautiful piece. More often than not, simpler is better, and then you just make it a little bit more complicated and interesting to the ear, which is what we're going to explore here. So looking at this main theme again, you can see it starts out with a very basic progression. It starts out with a B chord, and then you have a G with a 7th at the top, and then you transition to an A chord with some downward runs, which transition into your E, G, B chord. Now, as I said, we're just looking at standard bass chords. We're not really looking at anything complicated. All they've done is they've taken the rhythm of their melody, which is that sort of rhythm, and they've applied it to their chords here. Now, of course, the chords build on and they progress and they use other chords in their scale, and they even shake it up a little bit with a couple notes that aren't necessarily in their scale later on in the track. However, for the most part, this main theme here stays in the same key, same scale, and they're all using just these basic chords. A lot of composers I know out there will start their writing focusing around the chords of their piece and not necessarily the melody. This helps them, again, push that emotion forward, outline what their piece is supposed to sound like overall, and kind of get the base bonework of their track laid out. However, another way you can start writing out a piece like this is creating a melody. Now, when you're building a melody, you normally want to go off sort of a motif or a melodic idea. Again, I feel like the first motif we hear for this track that kind of outlines the rest of the melody is just that sort of like 3-note motif. You hear it right at the beginning. However, it's very hard to study a melody without taking in the full context of the harmony that's below it, because a melody is still part of your harmony. It's still part of your chords. It is normally the most forefront sound or the highest sound that you hear or the loudest sound, and it defines the emotion of your track more visibly than your harmony does. So it's very important to remember when writing out a melody and you're trying to make something similar to this, you don't necessarily want to go crazy with it. Again, you kind of just want to start simple and then add in sort of your extras later. Even looking at the melody here for this piece up in our high strings here, if you were to break it down in simplest, it just goes D, F, 3-note run down to a B, and then back to D, F, up to B, D, F, E, B. They're kind of keeping around that D and that F note in their melody with a little bit of flourish and a little bit of interest added in. Now, what if you don't want to start with the chords of the melody? What if you've been using those two writing techniques for too long, you're sick of it? Well, another way you could use is, instead of writing out the general emotional bonework of your track first by going for your chords, or if you don't want to write out sort of the story part of your track by composing a melody, you can also always start with the more rhythmic and groundwork pieces such as the bass or the percussion. Now, the bass and the percussion in a lot of more modern compositions as well as classic compositions will follow the same rhythm, because the low percussion and the bass rhythm, such as your double bass or your tuba, they will try and strengthen each other's rhythms by either sharing certain notes with only one of them sort of adding in the little bit of flourishes, or they'll try to copy sort of the rhythms exactly, while the tonal one plays that tonal bass line and the other one is just your general rhythm. By understanding that these can all be broken down into simple chords, it will also really help you write out a more moving bass line. A lot of pieces have just a blocked bass. For example, look at the main theme here. It's a very blocked out bass line going B, G, A, E, and it's all very definitively blocked out, same as with our chords up top, which it's mimicking. The only difference is, as you get lower in your register, you don't necessarily want to add in as many flourishes because it can muddy up your mix. Things can get a little bit confusing sonically. So they add all the flourishes in as you get higher in your register, and they take out the flourishes as you get lower down. This serves two purposes. One, we've already said. One is that it keeps any mud out of your mix. It keeps any sort of sonic confusion from happening on the low end. The second reason is that it provides a very solid rhythm and low end pattern to your track. After writing out a solid bass line, you can actually use that to then further develop your chords above and your melody above, because now you can feel out the rhythm of it and you can feel out sort of the drive of it. Let's move further on into this piece where they do the second iteration of the main theme over here, and let's listen to that. Now, this right here is one of the reasons why, before I go into any sort of walkthroughs, I'll actually post a video that has the MIDI being played back as the song is being played, because that allows you to look at it and study it in real time. This prelude to the second iteration of the main theme, or you could even call it an extension to the main theme, is extremely blocked out. It's not very complicated at all. They were focusing more on the power of it and the drive of it by having these really powerful drawn out chords. However, as you move on and you get back into the main theme, they bring the rhythm back in. Rhythm is also something that is very important when you're writing out any music. Blocked chords are good, but even when you're listening to these blocked chord sections here, you have some sort of underlying rhythm, either in a bass drum or a snare drum. And you can also hear and see this rhythm in the strings, such as your cello here and your higher strings up here. They have a rhythm behind them still, helping to push that forward. This rhythm only gets stronger as they move on to the main section here. So once you have your chords, your bass, and your melody all blocked out, and you say added in sort of your flourishes in your melody, and you flushed out your melody all you want it to be, adding rhythm into your chords, bass, and other percussive instruments is extremely important to getting a piece to sound top-notch, high quality. Now, I know this is a little different from my other walkthrough videos that I've posted before, but I figured I'd take a new approach so as I could provide you guys with more information, more useful information on how to write your own music and how to study compositions such as this. As always, I highly recommend downloading the MIDI below. It's a great resource. I have it there for you. Download it, study it. If you're a composer wanting to learn how to write more music, write better themes, write better progressions, download it, study it. I have other ones you can go look at as well, so go check those out. We're going to be doing another Audio Tools Explained next week, so I hope you guys stay tuned for that, and you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good night.